A millionaire confined to a wheelchair for 6 months after an accident curiously receives a daily glass of wine, lovingly prepared by his devoted fiancée. Doctors said his paralysis was permanent, but when the 9-year-old daughter of his new housekeeper quietly watches from the kitchen, she whispers something that makes his blood run cold. The afternoon sun poured like liquid honey through the living room's panoramic window, painting the polished mahogany furniture and the soft leather of his wheelchair with a tranquil golden glow. To Arthur, that glow was a silent mockery, a reminder of days when his own legs carried him through sun-drenched gardens, along mountain trails, and through the bustling city streets he had helped build. Now, for 6 months, his world had been confined to the reach of his hands. Classical music, a soft Chopin nocturne floated in the air, mingling with the complex aroma of an expensive Bordeaux that filled the glass in his hand. It was his Sunday ritual, a piece carefully orchestrated by Isabella, his fiancée, the woman who had become the axis of his fractured universe. He watched her now, her silhouette moving with a grace that made him hold his breath, arranging a vase of white lilies on the grand piano. Her every gesture was a promise of care, of unwavering devotion. Since the accident, that terrible fall the doctors insisted had left permanent damage to his spine, Isabella had been his safe harbor. She managed his medications, coordinated his physical therapy sessions, and most importantly, filled the crushing silence of his new life with a tenderness he believed was his only salvation. Her love was the balm for the invisible wound that ached more than any physical injury, the wound of his vulnerability. He, a man who had always commanded his own destiny, now depended on her for the simplest tasks, and she never made him feel diminished. On the contrary, her care was so complete, so omnipresent, that he felt enveloped in a cocoon of protective love. The wine, for instance, was her idea. "It's medicinal, my love," she always said, her voice as velvety as the liquid itself. "To relax your nerves and help with recovery." He trusted her blindly, with the desperate faith of a man who had no other choice. His attention was diverted by a subtle movement near the kitchen door. It was Lena, the 9-year-old daughter of Maria, the new housekeeper. The girl stood there, her large brown eyes fixed on him, her small body partially hidden by the doorframe. She had been a silent presence in the house for the past few weeks, always observing everything with an unusual seriousness for her age. Arthur offered her a friendly smile, a gesture that usually made her smile back and then hide. But today, she didn't hide. Instead, she took a hesitant step into the room, her bare feet barely making a sound on the Persian rug. She put a finger to her lips, a clear sign for him to be quiet, and approached his wheelchair. Isabella remained with her back to them, absorbed in her task with the flowers. The girl leaned close to his ear, her breath smelling faintly of cookies. What she whispered next was not a childish secret, but a sentence that made the afternoon warmth dissipate and a chilling cold crawl up his spine, freezing his blood. "Uncle Arthur," her little voice trembled, almost inaudible. "The pretty lady puts a strange powder in your wine when you're not looking. My grandma said those things make your legs weak." Arthur froze, the wine glass trembling in his hand. The world seemed to stop. Chopin's nocturne sounded dissonant, almost funereal. He looked at the child's serious face, searching for any sign of playfulness, of fantasy. There was none, only a deep, honest concern. With a choked voice, he leaned in too, his heart pounding against his ribs. What did you see, Lena?" he whispered back, fear drying his throat. "I always see it," she replied, her eyes wide with sincerity. She gets a small vial hidden behind the flower canisters. She looks all around, opens the vial, and pours a little bit into your glass. Then she puts everything away real fast. She's been doing it for many weeks, Uncle Arthur. Every time she prepares your special wine. Every word from the girl was a nail being hammered into the foundation of his trust, into the sanctuary of love he believed he had found. The image of Isabella, his angel, moving furtively in the kitchen, transformed into something dark and terrifying in his mind. He looked at the woman by the piano, who now turned to him with a radiant smile, completely oblivious to the bomb that had just exploded in his world. That smile, which once warmed him, now seemed like a mask, hiding an abyss of intentions he couldn't, and perhaps didn't want to, comprehend. Isabella's smile was a work of art, a perfect composition of warmth and loving concern that now, to Arthur, seemed an elaborate facade, a porcelain mask hiding a monstrous truth. He felt Lena's small body stiffen beside him, as if the girl sensed the change in the atmosphere, the sudden drop in emotional temperature in the room. With an effort that cost him every ounce of self-control, Arthur forced a smile back at his fiancée. His mind screamed a chorus of denial, panic, and acute pain of betrayal. Whose little powder, weak legs. The child's words echoed, colliding with months of memories of care and affection. It couldn't be true. It was a child's fertile imagination, a bizarre fantasy. But her eyes. Lena's eyes didn't lie. He needed to get her out of there before Isabella noticed their secret conversation. He placed his hand on the girl's head, a paternal gesture. "Thanks for the secret, little one," he whispered, his voice surprisingly steady. "Now go play in the kitchen, okay? Before your mom misses you." Lena nodded, giving him one last worried look before scurrying back to the safety of the kitchen, disappearing as silently as she had appeared. Alone again with Isabella and the potential poison in his glass, Arthur felt cornered. Every sip he had ever taken of that medicinal wine now burned in his memory like acid. Was this why his recovery had stalled? Why the sensation in his legs, which the physical therapists initially hoped would return, never progressed? The idea was so vile, so unbelievable, that part of him wanted to laugh at his own paranoia. Isabella, his Isabella, the woman who bathed, him who read to him until he fell asleep, who cried with him on his darkest nights. She couldn't be capable of such cruelty. But the determination that had made him a millionaire wouldn't allow him to simply ignore the doubt. The seed was planted, and he needed to know if it would take root or die. He needed to see with his own eyes. An idea formed, a risky plan that made his heart race. Later that night, after dinner, the ritual would repeat. Isabella always brought him one last glass of wine to help him sleep. Normally, he waited for her in the living room, reading. Today, he would do differently. "I'm exhausted, darling," he said, his voice laden with a weariness that wasn't entirely feigned. "I think I'll rest a bit here on the sofa before going to bed. Would you bring me the wine here when it's ready?" Isabella smiled, the tenderness in her eyes almost making him give up. "Of course, my love. Rest." She kissed him on the forehead and went to the kitchen. Arthur maneuvered his wheelchair to the side of the large sofa, positioning himself so he could recline his head as if sleeping, but keeping a sliver of vision of the kitchen door through the decorative mirror on the opposite wall. He closed his eyes, regulated his breathing, making it slow and deep, and waited. The silence of the house was deafening, broken only by the distant sound of water running in the sink and the gentle clink of glass. Every second dragged on. He heard the familiar sound of the cork being pulled, the wine being poured, then a silence longer than usual. He imagined her standing still, looking around, making sure he was truly asleep. The tension was almost unbearable. His entire body was tense, fighting the urge to open his eyes and confront her. Then he saw it. In the distorted reflection of the mirror, Isabella's silhouette moved towards the pantry. She opened the cabinet door, reached behind a row of cans, and pulled out something small, a vial. Her movements were quick, furtive. She returned to the counter, unscrewed the cap, and, with a quick, deliberate gesture, inverted the vial over the wine glass. A fine white powder fell into the ruby liquid, dissolving instantly. Arthur felt the air escape his lungs. It was true. Every terrible word was true. At that moment, Isabella turned and walked towards him, the glass in her hand, the same loving smile on her face. "Here it is, my dear," she said softly, extending the wine to him. "Drink it all. It will help you have a peaceful night." The wine glass hovered in the air between them, a goblet of poisoned ruby offered with an angelic smile. Arthur's heart beat a symphony of terror and fury against his ribs. Isabella's face, framed by the soft light of the room, was the image of devotion. How was it possible that such a beautiful face could hide such deep darkness? He looked from the wine to her eyes, searching for a glimpse, a crack in the mask that might reveal the monster beneath. But there was nothing, only the love and concern he had learned to consider his only refuge. "Thank you, my dear," he managed to say, his voice sounding hoarse and strange to his own ears. His hand trembled as he took the glass, the cold glass, against his fingers, sending a shiver down his arm. He raised the glass to his lips, the familiar scent of Bordeaux now carrying a new, sinister note. He pretended to take a sip, tilting the glass while keeping his lips closed, letting a little of the liquid trickle from the corner of his mouth and drip onto his shirt. "Oh, how clumsy," he murmured, wiping his chin with the back of his hand. "I think exhaustion is getting the best of me." Isabella laughed, a crystalline sound that now seemed to him like the tinkle of broken glass. "Don't worry, darling. Just drink it and relax." She watched him with an intensity he had never noticed before. It wasn't just care, it was vigilance. She needed to make sure he consumed the dose. The realization hit him with the force of a punch. Every glass of wine, every gesture of affection was part of a calculated plan. He continued to pretend, to drink, making small sounds of appreciation while keeping most of the liquid in his mouth. When she turned to get a napkin, he discreetly spit the wine into a fern plant next to the sofa. In the days that followed, the house, once his sanctuary, became his prison and battlefield. Arthur lived in a state of constant alert, an actor in his own drama. He needed proof, something more concrete than a child's word and a furtive glance in a mirror. But at the same time, he needed to maintain appearances so as not to arouse Isabella's suspicions. The tension consumed him. He began to find excuses to avoid the wine. One night, he complained of a stomachache. Another, he said the doctor had suggested reducing alcohol to test a new medication. Each excuse was met with a wave of manipulative concern from Isabella. "But darling, the wine helps you so much," she insisted, her voice full of feigned hurt. "I do this for you, for your own good." The emotional pressure was immense. He felt guilty for doubting her, even as the truth became clearer and clearer. Little Lena, his unlikely ally, seemed to understand the situation without any words exchanged. She watched him from afar, her big eyes offering silent support. Arthur noticed, however, that the girl no longer approached the living room when Isabella was nearby. The change was subtle at first, but became evident when, one afternoon, he saw her trying to peek through the kitchen door, and Isabella intercepted her. He couldn't hear the words, but Isabella's tone was icy, and her gesture, pointing to the kitchen, was unequivocal. Later, he asked Maria, Lena's mother, if something was wrong. The woman, usually so cheerful, seemed uncomfortable. Ms. Isabella said it's better for Lena to stay in the kitchen. She said that children can bring germs, and that your recovery is very delicate, Maria explained, embarrassment tinting her cheeks. The veiled prejudice in the excuse was repulsive, but the real reason was clear to Arthur. Isabella had realized the girl was a witness. She was isolating Lena, cutting off his only line of external communication. Arthur's paranoia grew. He wasn't just being poisoned, he was being systematically isolated by the woman who swore she loved him. The protective cocoon now revealed itself as a web, and he was trapped in the center, with the spider approaching. Lena's isolation was the first domino to fall, and Arthur felt the impact on his soul. The germ's excuse was as thin as a veil, and beneath it he saw the face of Isabella's fear of being discovered. The cruelty of that restriction, the way she used class prejudice to push away an innocent child, ignited a cold, lucid rage within him. The fog of doubt began to dissipate, revealing the terrifying landscape of his reality. He could no longer afford to wait for a confession or an obvious slip-up. He needed to act. The first step of his counterplan was to test. The most terrifying hypothesis of all was the little powder really affecting his legs. With renewed determination, he decided to completely stop consuming anything Isabella prepared for him separately. The wine was the first casualty. In the next 2 days, he became a master of dissimulation. He accepted the glass of wine with feigned gratitude, waited for Isabella to be distracted, and poured the contents into potted plants or down the drain of his private bathroom. It was a cat and mouse game, and the stress was immense. He feared being caught at any moment, imagining the explosion of fury and manipulation that would follow. But fear was outweighed by a new sensation that was beginning to blossom within him: hope. On the morning of the 3rd day without the wine, something happened. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, like the first whisper of spring after a long winter. As he did his morning exercises in his chair, stretching his muscles as the physical therapist had taught him, he felt it. A tingling. It wasn't the phantom sensation or the nervous twinges that occasionally tormented him. It was a real tingling, a faint, distant electrical current in his right thigh. He stopped, his heart pounding. He concentrated, closing his eyes, trying to recapture the sensation. There it was again, a hum of life in a limb that had been dormant and dead for months. Tears welled in his eyes, tears not of sadness, but of a joy so intense it hurt. He wasn't permanently paralyzed. His body was still fighting, still trying to heal. For how long had this struggle been suppressed, sabotaged, day after day, with every glass of medicinal wine? Joy quickly gave way to horror. Months, 6 months of potential progress could have been stolen from him. The image of his body, trying to regenerate while continuously poisoned, was torture. He looked at his legs, no longer as useless appendages, but as victims of a silent, continuous crime. The hope he felt was now tempered with deep terror. If he was right, could the damage be irreversible? How much longer could he have endured before healing became impossible? The small physical improvement strengthened his resolve, but also plunged him into a new kind of agony. He was caught between the promise of recovery and the reality of his dependence. He needed Isabella. She organized his life, his care, his home. Confronting her without irrefutable proof would be a disaster. She would paint him as a mentally unstable man, traumatized by the accident, suffering from paranoid delusions. Who would believe him instead of the devoted, caring fiancé? Society, his friends, even his doctors, all saw the image she projected so carefully. He was alone in this battle, with a child as his only silent confidant. He needed more than a tingling in his leg. He needed the vial. He needed to know what was inside that small container that held the power to destroy his life. That night, the tension in the room was palpable. Isabella offered him the wine, and he refused again. This time, claiming the new medication made him nauseous. Her smile faltered just for a fraction of a second, but he saw it. He saw the frustration flicker in her eyes before being quickly replaced by excessive concern. "Oh, my poor love," she said, her hand on his forehead. "You look so pale. Maybe it's best not to go against the doctor's orders then." She took the wine back to the kitchen, but he knew that was just a temporary truce. She wouldn't give up so easily. He heard her on the phone later, speaking in a low voice with someone. He only managed to catch fragments of the conversation. Refusing, getting harder. "I need to speed things up." Speed what up? The thought sent a chill down his spine. Whatever she was planning, his time was running out. Arthur's continuous refusal to drink the wine created a fissure in Isabella's carefully constructed facade. The concern on her face began to transform into something darker, a barely contained frustration that manifested in dramatic sighs and hurt looks. She realized she was losing control, and that terrified her. The substance in the wine was her most effective tool, the anchor that kept him dependent and docile. Without it, he might begin to improve, to question, to break free. She couldn't allow that. It was time to change tactics, to appeal to the most powerful weapon in her arsenal, his emotional dependence. On Arthur's fourth night of abstinence, she staged her most audacious move. He was in the library, trying to concentrate on a book, but his mind was a whirlwind. The sensation in his right leg had become more consistent, a constant hum beneath the skin, a beacon of hope in a sea of fear. Isabella entered the room, not with a glass of wine, but with a face bathed in tears. They were silent, perfect tears, streaming down her cheeks like liquid diamonds. She stopped before him, her body trembling with a suppressed sob. "Arthur," she began, her voice broken, "what have I done wrong?" Arthur felt a knot form in his throat. Despite all he knew, all he suspected, seeing her pain, even if feigned, still affected him. It was a conditioned reflex, months of love and trust that couldn't be erased in a few days. "What are you talking about, Isabella?" he asked, trying to keep his voice neutral. "You've been avoiding me," she continued, tears now flowing freely. "You reject everything I do for you. The wine, I prepare it with so much love, thinking only of your recovery, and you throw it away as if it were poison." The word poison hung in the air, laden with a cruel irony only he could understand. "I know what you must think," she sobbed, falling to her knees beside his chair, a gesture of calculated submission. "That I'm a burden, that you're stuck with me. But everything I do is out of love. I dedicate every minute of my day to you." She took his hand, pressing it against her wet face. "And now, you reject me. You reject my care. If you no longer. Trust me, if my love isn't enough, maybe I should leave." The threat was delivered with a surgeon's precision. Leave him alone. The prospect terrified him, exactly as she intended. Who would take care of him? Who would manage the complex routine his life had become? For a moment of panic, he almost gave in, almost begged for forgiveness, almost pleaded for her to stay and bring him the damn wine. The dependence she had so painstakingly cultivated was a heavy chain on his spirit. But then he felt it. The tingling in his leg, stronger now, a pulsating reminder of the truth. This sensation was his compass, his anchor in reality. He looked at the woman kneeling at his feet, the consummate actress, and saw through the spectacle. He saw the desperate manipulation of someone about to be exposed. With a calmness that surprised him, he gently withdrew his hand. "Isabella, you're not a burden," he said, his voice firm. "I'm grateful for everything you do, but the decision about the wine is mine. It's my body, and I need to feel what's best for it now." The response was not what she expected. She expected pleading panic. Instead, she found calm resolution. For an instant, her mask of pain crumbled, revealing a flash of icy fury in her eyes. It was quick, but he saw it. It was the final confirmation that he was on the right track. She stood up, wiping her tears with an abrupt gesture. "As you wish, Arthur," she said, her voice cold. "But don't blame me if you regress. Don't blame me when the pain returns and you realize you were wrong." She turned and left the room, leaving behind a silence heavy with unspoken threats. The battle had shifted. It was no longer about the wine. It was about his will against hers. And he knew with terrifying certainty that she would not accept defeat easily. The defeat in the emotional battle left Isabella furious and cornered. Control was slipping through her fingers, and Arthur's unexpected calm was more alarming than any direct accusation. He was thinking, observing, and that was dangerous. If emotional manipulation didn't work, she needed to eliminate the original source of the problem, the witness. Little perceptive Lena, with her eyes that saw too much, was a loose end that needed to be cut, and her mother, Maria, was the means to achieve that end. 2 days after the confrontation in the library, the storm finally broke upon the innocent family. Arthur was in his office reviewing some work emails when he heard agitated voices coming from the entrance hall. Isabella's tone was sharp and cutting, an ugly dissonance in the usual harmony of the house. He maneuvered his chair to the door, opening it a crack to observe. Isabella stood tall, imperious, before a shrinking, tearful Maria. Lena clung to her mother's skirt, her little face pale with fear. "I can't believe I trusted you in my home," Isabella raged, her voice filled with theatrical indignation. "My diamond brooch, the brooch my grandmother gave me. It disappeared from my dresser this morning, and you were the only one who cleaned my room," Maria sobbed, shaking her head in denial. "I didn't take anything, Miss Isabella. I swear on my daughter. I would never steal anything in my life." The accusation was so absurd that Arthur felt sick. He knew Maria. In just a few weeks, he had recognized her honesty and her dignity. She was a hard-working woman who took pride in her service. The idea of her stealing was unthinkable. It was a setup, a cruel and transparent lie orchestrated by Isabella to get rid of them. "Don't come at me with oaths!" Isabella spat, the venom in her voice more potent than any powder she could put in the wine. "I want you to pack your things and leave my house immediately. Consider yourself fired, and you can be sure no employment agency will hire you again after I spread what you've done." The desperation on Maria's face was heartbreaking. Losing her job was a catastrophe for her and her daughter. Arthur felt a wave of impotent fury. He wanted to shout, to intervene, to expose Isabella's lie right then and there. But how? His word against hers, the devoted fiancé against the housekeeper accused of theft. He knew who would win in the eyes of the world. He was trapped in his chair, a forced spectator to the injustice unfolding in his own home. Lena, the silent little warrior, looked over her mother's shoulder, and her eyes met Arthur's. In them, he saw not just fear, but a question. "Will you help us, Uncle Arthur?" That silent gaze shattered him. He was a millionaire, a man of power and influence, and he could do nothing to protect the child who had risked everything to warn him. Isabella noticed the exchanged glance between them, and her face twisted into a mask of malignant triumph. She had succeeded. She had eliminated the witness and at the same time sent a clear message to Arthur. "See what I can do. See how ruthless I am." Maria, resigned and humiliated, took Lena's hand and turned to leave. "Let's go, my daughter." They passed by Arthur's office door, and he saw tears streaming down Lena's face, silent and devastating. They were being expelled, thrown into uncertainty because of him, because of the truth she dared to whisper. The front door closed with a final click, and the silence that followed was the heaviest and most oppressive Arthur had ever experienced. He was truly alone now, and Isabella's cruelty, once a dark suspicion, was now a brutal, undeniable certainty. The web wasn't just trapping him, it was destroying innocent lives around him. The silence left by Maria and Lena's departure was a physical presence in the house, a void that echoed Isabella's cruelty. Arthur sat in his office, the sound of the door closing still reverberating in his mind. The image of Lena's tear-streaked face, looking at him for help he couldn't offer, was burned into his consciousness. Guilt was an overwhelming weight. He was no longer just a victim. His inaction had made him complicit in that family's pain. The fury he felt was no longer cold and calculated. It was a wildfire. He needed proof, and he needed it now. Maria's dismissal, though devastating, was the final catalyst. Isabella had made a mistake. In her haste to eliminate the threat, she underestimated him, believing he would remain a passive observer. She was wrong. The opportunity arose that same night. Isabella, exhausted by the drama she herself created, took a sleeping pill and retired to her room earlier than usual. "I had such a stressful day, darling," she said, her voice falsely fragile. "I need to rest." Arthur waited, his heart pounding at a feverish pace, until the silence of the house was absolute. He heard her deep, regular breathing coming from the bedroom, a sign that she was in a deep sleep. It was now or never. With a precision and silence he didn't know he possessed, he maneuvered his wheelchair out of the office and towards enemy territory, the kitchen. The room, normally a place of comforting aromas, now seemed like a sinister laboratory. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat. He headed directly for the pantry, his heart in his mouth. The door creaked slightly as it opened, and he stopped, listening. No sound came from upstairs. He entered the small room, the scent of spices and grains enveloping him. His eyes scanned the shelves, searching for the hiding place Lena had described. Behind the flour canisters, there they were, 3 large canisters, a metal barrier to Isabella's secret. With trembling hands, he reached out, the effort making his shoulder muscles protest. He pushed the first canister, then the second, and then he saw it. Hidden in the dark corner of the shelf, exactly as the girl had said, was a small, unlabeled amber glass vial. It was smaller than he imagined, almost insignificant, but it held the power to ruin his life. He took it. The glass was cold to the touch. He held it against the faint kitchen light, seeing the fine white powder that coated the bottom. It was real. Everything was real. The validation should have brought relief, but instead, it brought a wave of nausea. He needed a sample. Opening the cabinet under the sink, he found a small zip-top plastic bag, the kind used for sandwiches. Carefully, he unscrewed the vial's cap and poured a small amount of the powder into the bag, sealing it tightly. He put the small bag in the inner pocket of his blazer and replaced the vial in its hiding place, arranging the flour canisters exactly as they had been. He left the pantry, closing the door with the same care. It was done. He had the proof in his possession, but as he turned to leave the kitchen, his gaze fell on something in the small trash can next to the counter. A crumpled piece of paper, carelessly tossed there. Driven by an instinct he couldn't explain, he leaned down and picked it up. He unfolded the paper with hesitant fingers. It wasn't a receipt or a grocery list. It was a prescription. A prescription from a veterinary clinic across the state. The name of the medication was printed in clear letters, xylazine hydrochloride. Below it, the instructions for use: muscle relaxant and sedative for large animals. Use with extreme caution. Arthur's blood ran cold. Veterinarian, large animals. He was being poisoned with a tranquilizer for horses. The revelation was so shocking, so grotesque, that he felt the air leave his lungs. It wasn't just sabotage, it was an act of dehumanization. In her eyes, he was no different from an animal, to be tamed and controlled. The wine glass, the love, the care, it was all a lie built on a pillar of unimaginable cruelty. The turning point was no longer mere suspicion, it was a brutal scientific certainty. The war had truly begun. The crumpled prescription was more devastating than the vial itself. The word veterinary burned in his mind, a mark of humiliation and horror. Arthur returned to his office, the paper and the powder sample guarded as if they were relics from a tomb. The adrenaline of discovery gave way to a deep chill, a desolate clarity. He looked at his own legs, inert on the wheelchair's footrests, and saw them in a new light. They were not merely victims of an accident, but of continuous, deliberate aggression, with a substance intended to subdue beasts. The rage he felt was so intense, it left him breathless, but it was a focused rage, sharp as a scalpel. The time for pain and disbelief had passed. Now it was time for strategy. His first phone call the next morning was not to the police, but to David Chen, his lawyer and the only friend he trusted implicitly. David was a methodical and discreet man whose loyalty had been forged in decades of corporate battles alongside Arthur. "David, I need you. Urgent. Come to my house, but enter through the back door. Don't let Isabella see you." Arthur's voice was a tense whisper on the phone. An hour later, David sat across from him in the office, his face a mask of concern. As Arthur told the whole story, from Lena's whisper to the discovery in the trash can, he placed the small bag with the powder and the prescription on the table. David listened in silence, his dark eyes narrowing with each new revelation. When Arthur finished, the lawyer picked up the prescription with his fingertips, as if handling toxic waste. "Xylazine," David murmured, pulling out his cell phone and searching the term. "Right. Used in horses and cattle for sedation. In humans, it can cause respiratory depression, bradycardia, hypotension, and, with prolonged use, neurological damage and severe muscle atrophy." Each word was a nail in the coffin of Arthur's hope for a simple recovery. "The damage, is it reversible?" Arthur asked, his voice almost failing. David looked at him, the compassion on his face in stark contrast to his professional demeanor. "It depends on the dosage and duration of exposure, Arthur. We need to get this sample to a lab immediately, and we need to find a trusted neurologist, someone outside Isabella's medical circle, to evaluate you secretly." While David articulated the action plan, Arthur's mind turned to Isabella. She wasn't just preventing his recovery, she was actively causing damage, possibly permanent. And why? Money was the obvious answer, but it seemed too simplistic. There was something more, a deeper cruelty in her actions. He remembered the urgency in her voice on the phone. "I need to speed things up." Speed what up? The wedding! The idea hit him with sudden clarity. That same afternoon, as if reading his thoughts, Isabella entered the office with a pile of bridal magazines and a radiant smile, the feigned indignation of Maria's dismissal completely forgotten. "My love, I was thinking, with all this stress, I think we need something happy to focus on," she said, her voice melodious. "I think we should set a date for our wedding. Blessed unions help with healing, you know? A celebration of our love will give us strength. How about next month?" The proposal, which should have been a joyful moment, sounded like a sentence. Marrying her now seemed like an alliance with his own destroyer. He needed time, but refusing openly would raise suspicions. "That's a wonderful idea, darling," he said, forcing an enthusiasm that churned his stomach. "But a month, that's so fast, we'll barely have time to plan." "Don't worry about a thing," she interrupted, stroking his hair. "I'll take care of everything. I just need you to sign some papers with the lawyers, routine prenuptial things, to merge our assets. That way, we'll be a unit in everything, health and finances." The mention of finances was the click he needed. David had already told him about the prenuptial agreement Isabella had proposed, a document that, in the event of Arthur's permanent incapacity, would give her total control of his fortune. At the time, it had seemed like a gesture of commitment. Now it was clearly the motive. She was accelerating the wedding to consolidate her financial control before he could recover or discover the truth. Her plan wasn't just to keep him sick. It was to ensure he stayed sick forever, turning him into her personal, perpetual ATM. Isabella's urgency to formalize the union was the final alarm. The marriage wasn't a celebration of love, but the final stage of her hostile takeover, not of a company, but of his life. While she hummed around the house, making guest lists and flipping through flower catalogs, Arthur and David worked in the shadows, mounting a silent counter-offensive. The first piece of the puzzle arrived from the lab where David had sent the powder sample. The analysis was swift and conclusive. The substance was, indeed, high-purity xylazine hydrochloride, consistent with veterinary use. But the report contained an even more sinister detail. The sample also contains traces of a beta-blocker agent, commonly used to treat cardiac arrhythmias. David read over the phone, his voice grim. The combination is dangerous. Xylazine lowers blood pressure and heart rate, while the beta blocker can exacerbate these effects. Whoever is doing this isn't just trying to immobilize you, Arthur. They're playing with your life. The news fell on Arthur like a concrete slab. The sabotage was deeper and more dangerous than he imagined. Each glass of wine was not just an obstacle to his mobility, but a calculated risk to his heart. The second piece came from a private investigator David hired, a grizzled, discreet ex-cop named Frank. Frank's task was simple: unearth everything he could about Isabella Rossi's past. The initial results were superficial: a modest childhood, a few jobs in art galleries, a social circle that skirted high society. But Frank was good at digging deeper. He discovered something not in any public record: a trail of relationships that ended in eerily similar ways. She had 2 previous engagements, Frank reported to Arthur and David in another secret meeting in the office. Both with very wealthy men. The first, a real estate magnate, suffered a severe skiing accident. He survived but developed unexpected neurological complications during recovery. He became permanently dependent on full-time care. Isabella was his dedicated caregiver for a year, until he signed over a substantial portion of his assets to her in an agreement of gratitude. After that, she left him. The pattern was so clear that Arthur felt a chill run through his body. "And the second?" he asked, his voice tense. "The second was an oil fortune heir," Frank continued. "He had a car accident, head injuries, same story. Recovery stalled. Unexplained medical issues arose. Isabella cared for him, managed his finances, and eventually left the relationship with a generous donation. Both men now live in long-term care facilities with vague diagnoses of chronic neurological damage. In both cases, Isabella was praised by the community as an angel of mercy." The room fell silent, the weight of the revelation hanging in the air. Isabella wasn't a common criminal. She was a serial predator, a black widow who didn't kill her prey, but kept them alive in a state of perpetual dependence, ensuring a constant flow of income and control. He, Arthur, was just the latest in her line of victims. His vulnerability after the accident was not a misfortune that attracted her love. It was the trigger that attracted her predation. The discovery changed everything. It was no longer just about his own safety or recovery. There were other victims, men whose lives had been systematically destroyed. There was a matter of justice that transcended his own situation. He looked at David, then at Frank. The expression on their faces mirrored his own grim determination. The trap Isabella was setting for him was about to close, But now he knew exactly how to turn it against her. The hunt had begun, but the prey was no longer him. The revelation of Isabella's predatory pattern solidified Arthur's determination, transforming his fear into an armor of purpose. He was no longer fighting just for his legs, but for the lives she had already destroyed and for those she might destroy in the future. The battle, however, needed to be fought on her territory, under her roof, while he continued to play the role of the loving, dependent fiancé. It was an exhausting performance. Every smile he gave her, every word of affection, felt like a betrayal of himself, but it was necessary. He needed her to feel safe, to believe her plan was running smoothly. Meanwhile, David orchestrated the next phase, a clandestine medical evaluation. Finding a neurologist willing to make a secret house call to a high-profile patient was a challenge. But David, with his network of contacts, found the perfect man, Dr. Alistair Finch, a semi-retired physician with an impeccable reputation and a personal aversion to hasty diagnoses. The plan was executed with the precision of a military operation. On a Wednesday, Isabella had a wedding planning lunch with her wedding planner, a guaranteed 3-hour absence. Frank, the investigator, would stand guard outside on the street, ready to alert them to any unexpected return. Punctually at noon, Dr. Finch, a short, energetic man with piercing eyes, arrived through the back door, carrying a worn leather briefcase. He wasted no time. While David stood guard at the office door, Dr. Finch began his evaluation. He reviewed Arthur's initial exams, the reports from his doctors and physical therapists. Then he began the physical examination. He tested his reflexes, used needles and tuning forks to measure sensitivity in his legs, and had him try to move his muscles against the resistance of his hands. Arthur, who had grown accustomed to the numbness, was surprised by the doctor's intensity and focus. "The initial damage to your spine was significant, no doubt," Dr. Finch said, his face serious, "but the lack of any nerve regeneration, that's atypical. Given your age, general health, and the type of physical therapy you described, I would expect to see some sensory return, however small." Then Dr. Finch took the lab report David had given him, analyzing the composition of the substance found. His eyes widened slightly. "Xylazine and a beta blocker," he murmured, more to himself. "My God." He looked at Arthur, and for the first time, there was a shadow of alarm on his calm face. "Mr. Belmont, xylazine is a potent central nervous system depressant. With continuous use, it not only prevents the regeneration of peripheral nerves, but can, in fact, cause progressive damage. It essentially shuts down the signals your brain sends to your legs, and the C nerves without stimulation begin to atrophy." Arthur felt a chill run through his body. "Progressive damage? What does that mean, Doctor?" Dr. Finch hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "It means that every dose you took not only kept you paralyzed, but actively worsened your condition. Every glass of wine diminished your chances of a full recovery." The hope that had been growing in Arthur in recent weeks suffered a brutal blow. It wasn't just a matter of stopping the poison to start healing. The poison had already left its scars. "How long has this been going on?" the doctor asked. 6 months, Arthur replied, his voice empty. Dr. Finch closed his eyes for a moment, processing the information. 6 months. The optimal window for nerve regeneration is critical. I won't lie to you. The path to recovery will be much longer and harder than it should have been. Every day this continues, the possibility of permanent damage increases exponentially. The truth was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it confirmed Isabella's malice on a scale he could barely comprehend. On the other, it robbed him of the certainty of a happy ending. Recovery was no longer a guarantee, but an arduous battle against time and the damage already done. His paralysis was no longer a static condition, but an active deterioration. Isabella wasn't just keeping him in a cage, she was, slowly and methodically, throwing away the key. Dr. Finch's evaluation left Arthur in a state of desolation. The hope of a full recovery, which had been his beacon, now seemed like a distant flickering light. The urgency of his situation became visceral. Every hour he spent under the same roof as Isabella was an hour his chance to walk again diminished. Rage gave way to a cold despair. He needed something more, incontestable proof of her intent, something no skilled lawyer could distort. He needed a confession, and in a stroke of luck or fate, the opportunity to obtain it came from the most improbable source. A few days after Dr. Finch's visit, Arthur received an email. The sender's address was unknown, and the subject was simply, "For the uncle at the big house." His heart leapt. He opened the email. The message was short, written with the typing errors of someone unfamiliar with technology. It was from Maria. "Mr. Arthur, I'm sorry to bother you. I know I shouldn't, but my Lena won't stop crying. She says the pretty lady is mean and that she's going to hurt you. She's very scared. She said she needs to tell you something she heard. She doesn't want to talk on the phone. She's afraid the lady will hear. I don't know what to do. I just pray you are well." The email was a lifeboat in an ocean of uncertainty. Lena had heard something important. Arthur replied immediately, using a secure email David had created for him. He instructed Maria to meet him the next day at a small public park several miles from his home. The plan was risky. He would have to invent an excuse to go out alone for several hours, something he hadn't done in months. The solution came in the form of a follow-up appointment with his original orthopedist, one Isabella had scheduled and remembered. He would say he needed some time alone to process the news, and that he would dismiss the driver to be picked up by a friend, David. Isabella, seeing him follow a routine she had established, probably wouldn't suspect. The lie worked. She seemed pleased that he was being proactive with his health and kissed him on the cheek as he left. "Be strong, my love," she said. At the park, David waited at a discreet distance, while Arthur maneuvered his chair to an isolated bench under the shade of a large oak tree. Soon he saw Maria and Lena approaching, both looking nervous and out of place. Lena, upon seeing him, ran towards him. "Uncle Arthur!" she exclaimed, her voice full of relief. She stopped beside his chair, her eyes wide and serious. "I need to tell you. Before we left, I heard her on the phone with a friend." The girl took a deep breath as if gathering all her courage. She was laughing. She said, "He's getting suspicious. I think I'll have to speed up the process." The friend asked what she was going to do, and she said, "I'll increase the dose after the wedding. Just a little bit more in the celebration wine. Enough to make sure he never suspects and never fully recovers. He'll be mine forever." Every word from the child was a hammer blow, forging the last piece of Arthur's armor, the clear and premeditated intent to cause permanent harm. "Lena, you are the bravest girl I have ever known," Arthur said, his voice choked with emotion. "But people might not believe you. They might say you're just a child." Lena's face filled with fierce determination. "But I can prove it," she said, pulling something from the pocket of her little jacket. It was an old cell phone, an ancient model with a scratched screen. "My grandma taught me how to record things. When I heard her talking, I hid behind the curtain and recorded everything." She pressed a button, and Isabella's voice, crisp and cruel, filled the silent air of the park, repeating the same horrible words Lena had just quoted. The recording was the silver bullet, the irrefutable proof that would destroy Isabella's facade forever. Arthur looked at the girl, whose innocent eyes had seen a truth that all the adults around him had ignored. She hadn't just warned him. She had armed him for the final battle. The recording on Lena's cell phone was the piece that completed the puzzle. It was Isabella's voice, stripped of all her false sweetness, revealing the cold, calculating core of her intentions. Arthur. David and Frank listened to the recording several times in the office, the sound of her laughter echoing in the room like an omen. The confession was clear. Increase the dose. Ensure he never recovered. Have him forever. It was definitive. Proof not only of the poisoning, but of the premeditation to cause permanent damage. Justice, once an abstract concept, now had a clear path. David immediately contacted a detective he trusted in the police department, a man known for his integrity, and handed over a complete dossier. The lab report, the private investigators, findings, Dr. Finch's testimony, and the crown jewel, Lina's recording. The detective assured them a warrant would be obtained, but they needed the perfect moment to act, to catch her red-handed. The perfect moment would be the night before the wedding. Isabella was planning an intimate pre-wedding celebration, just for the two of them. It would be, she had said, a night to reaffirm their vows and toast to the future. Arthur knew this would be the night she administered the increased dose, the coup de grace to his mobility. The plan was drawn with surgical precision. The police would be on standby, hidden outside the property, waiting for David's signal. Frank would be monitoring communications, and Arthur, the main actor, would have to perform the role of his life. The days leading up to the confrontation were the longest and most tense of Arthur's life. He lived in a state of duality, smiling at the woman who planned his ruin, discussing floral details while his mind replayed the script of the decisive night. Finally, the night arrived. The living room was decorated with candles and white roses, a scene of idyllic romance that concealed a rotten truth. Isabella was stunning in a silver silk dress, her face shining with triumph. She believed she had won. She believed that in less than 24 hours, control over Arthur's fortune and life would be absolute. "To us, my love," she said, entering the room with 2 crystal glasses and the bottle of special Bordeaux. "To our forever." Arthur watched her every move. She placed the glasses on the coffee table, poured the wine, and then, with a smile, said, "I'll go get some canapes I prepared. Such a special toast deserves a perfect accompaniment." She went to the kitchen. Arthur knew what she was going to do. His heart pounded wildly, but his face remained calm. It was the final performance. He heard the subtle sound of the pantry door opening and closing. She returned, the smile still in place, and picked up the glass meant for him. "Here you are, darling. Drink. Tonight marks the beginning of our new life together." She extended the glass to him, the dark, glistening liquid looking more ominous than ever. It was the moment. With the hand that wasn't trembling, Arthur took his cell phone from his pocket and dialed David's number, leaving the call active. He looked into Isabella's eyes, dropping all pretense. "Before we toast, Isabella," he said, his voice cold and firm, "there's something you need to hear." He turned up the volume on his phone and pressed play. Her voice, cruel and mocking, filled the silence of the room. "I'll increase the dose after the wedding. Enough to make sure he never suspects and never fully recovers." Isabella's smile froze. Her face went through a rapid succession of emotions: confusion, denial, panic, and finally, pure, uncontrolled fury. The mask fell, revealing the monster beneath. "Where did you get that?" she hissed, her eyes flashing with hatred. "That proves nothing." "It proves everything, Isabella," Arthur said, his voice calm, contrasting with hers. "It proves the last 6 months. It proves why Maria was fired. It proves what's in this wine." The tension reached its peak. Desperation took over her. In a last act of madness, she lunged forward, trying to force the glass against his lips. "Drink!" she screamed, her face contorted. "You need me. Without me, you're nothing. Drink and you'll need me forever." It was at that exact moment that the living room doors burst open with a crash. 2 uniformed detectives entered, followed by David. "Isabella Rossi," said the lead detective, his voice resonating with authority, "you are under arrest for suspicion of assault, administering a harmful substance, and fraud." Isabella froze, the wineglass falling from her hand and shattering on the floor, the poisoned liquid spreading across the white rug like a dark bloodstain. The sound of breaking glass was the final sound of her world of lies falling apart. The shattering of the wineglass marked the end of a nightmare and the beginning of a long, arduous journey back to the light. As the detectives read Isabella her rights, her face now a mask of shock and mute hatred, Arthur felt a wave of relief so profound it left him breathless. The air in the room, once heavy with deceit and threat, suddenly felt lighter, cleaner. Isabella's arrest was swift and efficient. She didn't utter a word, her silence more condemning than any denial. As she was led away, her eyes met Arthur's one last time. In them there was no remorse, only the cold fury of a predator whose hunt had been interrupted. And then she was gone, and the house fell into a silence that, for the first time in months, was peaceful. In the days and weeks that followed, Arthur's life underwent a radical transformation. The story inevitably leaked to the press, creating a media storm. But Arthur, protected by David, remained isolated from the circus, focusing on two things: justice and recovery. The legal process against Isabella was overwhelming. The evidence was irrefutable. The analysis of the broken glass confirmed the presence of xylazine in a dangerously high dose. Lena's recording was the centerpiece, proof of her malicious intent. Furthermore, the investigation into her previous engagements was reopened, and the families of the other victims, once resigned to their unexplained diagnoses, now had an answer and a cause to fight for. Isabella would face not only Arthur's accusations, but a history of manipulation and abuse. Her empire of lies completely collapsed. While justice ran its course, Arthur fought his own battle. The first thing he did was transform the luxurious living room, the stage of his poisoning, into a rehabilitation center. The grand piano was moved to a corner. The expensive sofas were replaced by parallel bars, weights, and physical therapy equipment. The place where he used to receive his medicinal wine became the epicenter of his fight to regain what had been stolen from him. The journey was brutal. Dr. Finch was right. The damage was significant. The first days of intensive physical therapy were filled with frustration and pain. His muscles, weakened by months of inactivity and chemical sabotage, barely responded. Sensations in his legs were erratic, sometimes sharp and painful, other times frustratingly absent. There were moments of despair, nights when the enormity of the challenge almost crushed him. Doubt crept in, whispering that perhaps Isabella had won after all, that the damage was permanent. But then he remembered. He remembered Lena's brave face, David's loyalty, Maria's dignity. He wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting to honor the faith they had placed in him. He clung to every small progress like a treasure. The first involuntary tremor in a thigh muscle, the first time he could feel the rough texture of the physical therapy ball under the sole of his foot. Every tiny victory was an act of defiance against Isabella's legacy. One of his first actions as a free man was to find Maria and Lena. He located them in a small rented apartment, struggling to start over. Without hesitation, he offered Maria her old job back, but not as a housekeeper. He appointed her estate manager, with a salary that would give her security and stability, and offered them the guest house as permanent residence. The gratitude on Maria's face was a greater reward than any business success he had ever had, and Lena, the girl now free from fear, became a child again. Her laughter echoed through the gardens, a sound of life and hope that cleansed the last traces of Isabella's shadow. She became a constant presence in his physical therapy sessions, a fierce little cheerleader who celebrated his every move. The bond between the millionaire and the housekeeper's daughter, forged in secrecy and danger, had transformed into a genuine friendship, an unlikely family born of adversity. 6 weeks had passed since that fateful night. 6 weeks that felt like a lifetime. Autumn had arrived, and the leaves outside the panoramic window painted the landscape with shades of gold and scarlet, a reflection of the profound transformation occurring within. The living room, now permanently converted into a rehabilitation. Gym was a place of sweat, effort, and increasingly triumph. The broken wine glass, a symbol of manipulation and control, had been swept away and discarded, replaced by glasses of crystal-clear water that accompanied Arthur's genuine recovery journey. Classical music still played, but now it was not a backdrop for sedation, but the soundtrack of resilience. The climax of Arthur's personal journey did not happen in a courtroom or on a newspaper headline, but in a quiet, monumental moment. He was standing, wavering, unsteady, leaning heavily on the parallel bars, but standing. His legs trembled under the effort, his muscles protesting, but they were supporting his weight. The physical therapist was beside him, offering words of encouragement, but the true spectators, the ones who mattered, were near the door. Maria watched with silent tears streaming down her face, and Lena was there, her small hands clasped, her breath suspended in anticipation. "Now, Arthur," the physical therapist said, "one step at a time. Move your right hand forward." He obeyed. "Now, slide your left foot." With a concentration that consumed every fiber of his being, Arthur lifted his left foot from the floor. It was a hesitant, clumsy movement, but it was a movement. He placed it on the floor, a few inches from where he stood. It was the first step he had taken in over 8 months. A step, a miracle, a victory over the poison, over the lie, over the cruelty. He took another step and then another. Exhausted, he leaned on the bars, his forehead covered in sweat, but a wide, genuine smile lit up his face. He looked at Lena, and the girl burst into applause, running towards him and hugging his leg. "You did it, Uncle Arthur! You did it!" He reached out and stroked her hair, his heart overflowing with a gratitude so immense it was almost painful. In that moment, Arthur understood the true nature of strength. It was not in controlling others, nor in accumulating wealth. It was in the vulnerability of trusting the right person, in the courage to fight against darkness, and in the resilience to rise after being broken. He had learned that true love never uses dependence as a tool of control, but rather empowers and uplifts. He discovered that his greatest weakness, his tendency to trust blindly, almost destroyed him, but that his greatest strength came from the trust he placed in the honest observation of a child. The journey ahead was still long. He might never regain the agility he once took for granted, but he was standing. And with every step he took, he moved further away from Isabella's shadow and walked towards a future he would build himself, one step at a time. The property, where silent manipulation once reigned, now resonated with the sounds of physical therapy, genuine laughter, and the deep connection of an unlikely family. Arthur Belmont, the millionaire confined to a wheelchair, had found his salvation not in an expensive Bordeaux or in calculated care, but in the whispered truth of a brave little girl. And that truth, pure and simple, set him free. He looked out the window at the afternoon sun, the same golden sun from that fateful Sunday. But now, it was no longer a mockery. It was a promise. The promise of new days, of new walks, and the unwavering certainty that sometimes the most important observations come from the purest and most innocent eyes.